Oh, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. Man, today, good stuff. We're going to talk about the state of the industry, right? But, well, we're going to be talking about the state of the industry in 2019. Yeah, it's July, all right? But, man, this stuff takes a lot of time and effort to compile. And I've got the two. If you want to talk about data in the comic book world, there's really two people you want to talk to. You want to talk to John Jackson Miller. You want to talk to Brian Hibbs. I know both those guys. I got both of them here today. They both put out reports every year about like all of the sales of all comics and graphic novels across all channels. Brian Hibbs looks at something called BookScan, and John Jackson Miller looks at kind of even a way broader picture than that. And so they're going to talk about their methodologies, and they're going to talk about the data for 2019. Obviously, the unspoken elephant in the room here is what? It's COVID-19, man. That's changing everything, starting at basically when these guys stop looking at this data. So this is not about 2019. Obviously, we're going to see a lot of different numbers that are going to be put in stark relief going forward because of the changes in the whole world that have taken place. So let me get rid of this banner. And let me just real quick say, hey, coming next week, coming this Tuesday, rather, coming tomorrow night, I've got a really special show. My favorite all-time cartoonist, Peter Bagg, is going to be on here with one of my new favorite cartoonists, Noah Van Sciver. They're going to talk about nonfiction comics and kind of the indie world of comics in general. It is going to be really awesome. I'm super excited about that. Speaking of guests, if you want to be a guest or have your comics reviewed on Comic Book News, yeah, just email cbn@danshaheen.com. Send me a message, send me some links, send me some PDFs. Better yet, mail me some comics, man. I'll read them. I'll check them out. We'll talk about them on the show. So without further ado, I want to bring in the people that you came here to see. Well, I'm going to bring in, oh, wait, one more note. Comments, right? We got them turned off. We're not looking at them yet, but there will be a Q&A section at the end as usual so that I can concentrate on this conversation with these two really smart guys. So without further ado, let me bring them on in. We're going to bring in first Brian Hibbs. Brian, welcome back to Comic Book News.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Running around with my head cut off, obviously. Let me bring in our next guest, John Jackson Miller. If you want to talk about either comic books or what lightsabers, then I want to talk to John Jackson Miller. John, welcome back.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. And I was going to say it's a family reunion or a magazine reunion for me and Brian. Brian, of course, got his start writing. He did a column in Comics Buyer's Guide to begin with, and then when we spun off a magazine for a trade magazine for comics, he became the first regular columnist for it. And this is the first issue I actually edited, which was about 2 years in. Here's there we go. There's Brian Hibbs, 1994, More Sound and Fury for Publishers.
I love it.
Yeah, and I think he got me in trouble right away because I think at the end of it he's ragging on Valiant because they were claiming that they were making a great gesture to the comics industry by making stuff returnable if it was late, and Capital had already made everything returnable if it was late by a certain point. And this resulted in an entertaining dinner with Valiant and me and my boss and my sales manager in the Capital show in St. Louis because Marty Stever, who was the head of he was basically their person to shake people up when they're not saying what the publisher wants them to say. We ended up in about a 35-minute argument about the First Amendment and everything else. And I remember my ad rep is just absolutely having a conniption fit, freaking out, and my publisher is white as a sheet, and Mazarski is sitting there just going, what the hell is going on here? But yes, it was the first of many battles with that we went through in all the years.
I would imagine it was almost every month, honestly.
It was I can't count them all. It's I'm so glad not to be doing that part anymore.
Yeah, now so it's Patty McConnell's job.
So this is a data dork reunion, right? These are guys that have for a really long time who, like, over decades, if I wanted to know anything about the numbers in the industry, I'm reading what these guys wrote. So, but what a lot of people don't get is like how much work it takes to do what they do. And even I don't really get it. So that's why the first thing we're going to talk about here really quick is methodology. And we're going to just let these guys real fast. I'm going to start with Brian. And Brian, let's talk about for a second about BookScan, please. Tell us what it is and what you do and what you're laying on top of the BookScan numbers.
Yeah, so BookScan is a third-party service essentially that it was originally part of Nielsen. It's now NPD Group BookScan. And it's essentially Nielsen ratings for books is the simplest way to think about it. What they do is they have arrangements with independent bookstores, large booksellers, Amazon, Walmart, etc., where every week they collect their sales data and they make reports out of it essentially, and then sell it to people, and that's their business model. So that's sort of the essential of what BookScan is. They claim that they are roughly, I think, 85% of the books being sold get reported through them. I don't know if that's part of it is accurate or not, but all I can do is just base upon what they say.
And I'm assuming that number is coming from, because these are coming from a lot of big chains, a lot of them, and so there's a lot of point of sale, like it's literally the books that are getting scanned or getting reported in this thing that's being sold. Okay, so then what do you do? Where do you get those numbers, by the way? You're always very mysterious, like there's a mole, you got a source. So how do you get them and what do you do with them?
Yeah, sources and methods. Sources and methods. That's what we say.
So this is my 17th year. Oh my God, 17 years of doing this. And let me actually, make the point too that the reason I started doing this was because we had such good numbers, relatively speaking, from the direct market. We knew what the direct market was doing. We understood how the direct market functioned by and large. What we didn't know was what was happening in the bookstores. It was a black box. Publishers would say things, but we never had any proof to see what was going on. But I knew that BookScan existed, and so 17 years ago, I started reaching out to a number of the publishers. Originally, it was a Diamond employee who was giving me this. That person is no longer with the. In fact, that person is no longer alive. So I don't worry about any.
Well, I have a guess who that might be. I'm not.
Well, I'm not. Either way, no one's gonna get in trouble anymore for that.
Yeah.
Especially because it was Nielsen then. It's a different company.
But why are the numbers hard to get in the first place? Like who does have access to them and why?
Because you have to pay for them. That's the business model of Nielsen, right? Is that you pay them to find out how your books are selling, and these big publishers are paying, I think, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for access to this information every month.
Got it.
Or every week, honestly. My understanding is that publishers who subscribe, it's, they can get precise, detailed, how's it selling in this region, how's it selling in that region. Yeah. They can do comparables. There's a lot of more data than what I get. So what I get is a once a year dump of here's what sold between January 1st and December 31st of the year. Here's the whole thing. As I said, originally I was getting it from Diamond, and then they decided they didn't want to do that anymore. Well, and then I started getting it from publishers, and eventually Heidi reached out to, once NPD Group bought BookScan, Heidi reached out and made it official. So now I'm getting it actually from BookScan.
Oh, great.
There's a couple of years in there, particularly 2015, 2016, where it was clear to me that the data that I was given had been massaged in some way. And it looked like what they did was whoever handed me the data first went through and removed anything that was out of print, which it is kind of, I understand the logic of that, but those books are still selling. They're still, in fact, today, they're still selling books from like DC's imprint of Minx, which ended 14 years ago. There are still copies being sold in bookstores. There's a bookstore out there somewhere that has copies on their shelf.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting that those numbers are out there, but are like being trimmed out now. Is that what you're saying? That those are no longer?
Yeah,
that was just 2 years, and I think I actually helped him. I did a projection of what I thought those would be, but there are a few ways for civilians to actually see the numbers at BookScan if you want to. Milton Greep at ICV2 every week or every he does a regular what the top 20 graphic novels are. Publishers Weekly will actually give you the numbers weekly on its website for the top 25 hardcover novels, and then they have a graphic novel section as well. And so they give you the numbers there. And if you're an author and you have an account with Amazon as an Amazon author, they will give you all your BookScan data on a regular basis. So that's, for example, my novels for Star Wars, Star Trek, graphic novels and things. If you are a creator, you can get access to this stuff.
Yeah.
But just your stuff.
Sure. The what I'm getting though is 40,000.
Yeah.
40,745 was the number that I got for 2019. As books selling as little as one copy.
Yeah.
And I actually what I really get is a number that's more like 42 or 43,000 at least. And one of the very first things I do is I go through and I start cleaning up the data, because the data will have stuff in it that isn't books, right? So the way that it works is that BookScan tracks by what's called a BISAC number. I don't remember what the acronym actually means, but it's a way of categorizing books. It's kind of like a Dewey Decimal System numbers, sort of. In other words, that this is juvenile nonfiction, that this one is manga sports, that this one is superhero comics, whatever. So, but the thing is that nobody picks those BISAC numbers except for the publishers. And the publishers are allowed to do any goddamn thing that they want to with those numbers. They can assign up to 4 different BISAC numbers to a book. And so what happens is you'll get like publishers who are stealing pictures of Superman and making a coloring book out of it, and they're BISACing it as though it were a comic featuring Superman. So one of the first things I've got to do is, it's really easy for obviously for a DC or a Penguin Random House or Scholastic, they're not fucking around with their numbers, but smaller one-off publishers, people who are doing print on demand stuff, they're always miscategorizing it. So the very first thing I do is I go and I do a cleanup of that data, which takes 30 hours probably. It's an absurd amount of work, to go through 44,000 items one line at a time and go, is this something, and then I'm going through and I'm cutting and pasting the ISBN, cutting and pasting it into my browser to go to Amazon, to go to look inside, so I can see physically what this thing is, because sometimes they'll categorize it as a comic, but it's not a comic. It's a prose book that's about comics. And so you just got to kind of go through and massage that data every month.
Because you're looking to purely look at, comics and graphic novels.
Apples to apples. Yeah. I mean, I know that my data has all kinds of, it's not 100% right. It's if I'm lucky, it's 98% right. But I'd rather it be 98% right than 92%.
Sure. Okay. So you go, you call the comics, then what then what do you do? Once you know what are comics?
Yeah. So then the next thing I do is I sort of slice it up into a variety of slices. I slice it Western versus American, or Eastern comics versus manga, blah, 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 blah. So, because I think there's a distinction in how those comics are made, what the financial picture of those comics are, who the audience for those comics are. So that's one slice. I slice it into publishers so I can see how publishers are doing relative to one another, what the best sellers are top to bottom. You know, what's interesting when you look at charts like this, particularly in the book world, is the heights of the charts are really not representative of most of the charts, right? So ICB2 puts out the top 25 occasionally, but those books sell so much better than everything else. It's really not giving you a lot of information. For example, the #1 bestseller in bookstores last year was a volume of Dogman, which sold more than 1 million copies, right? By the time you got to the number 25 book, it sold like 75,000 copies. So the difference between 1 million copies and 75,000 copies is really, really big. And so that's why I think it's important to look at the middle of the chart, the bottom of the chart, just to get a sense of what's going on in the world.
Right. Yeah, it's like comparing or whatever the indie film market to the blockbusters. It's not going to be the same audience, same marketing, same everything, same economics. Okay, so you break it into those things, and then that's what you present, right? That's what you try to give out, is just like kind of a look at comics and how they're selling in the bookstore market. Okay.
Yeah. So what I do is I report on the top 750, the 750 best-selling books. The reason for this is because 17 years ago, that's all I got was 750 items. And I wanted consistency throughout time. But the other part of it is that historically, the top 750 is basically equal to the bottom 39 250 items, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because there's so many things sell 1 copy or 2 copies or 5 copies. Things that sell 10,000, 15,000 copies are actually really, really rare. The average book, mathematically speaking, if you divide the total circulation by the total number of books, the average book sells less than 600 copies. Okay.
I think the median is even below that. I think that. Yeah.
I've never bothered.
Yeah.
I just did the simple one.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting and what'll probably never be captured is like how many times do those things get sold and resold at used bookstores, online, other places as well.
Well, sure, yeah, that's definitely not ever going to be captured. Bookscan, wouldn't capture that because they're not new book sales.
Sure.
I suppose someone could be reporting used book sales to Bookscan. I guess it's possible. I don't know.
It is. It's very, very rare. It's not worth worrying about. It's
exactly
sure. It's just I just pointed out to say that we'll never truly get. You can never really get the true exact number. You can get close. You can get slices, and a lot of it though is guesswork and sneaker elbow grease or whatever you want to call it. Right, like hard work that you have to do. I wanted to point that out. Okay, so. Any other hard work? Is that about it on the book at the Bookscan level, and then you present those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, then I make a bunch of charts that I don't know that anybody other than me and John care about.
I care.
Like I'm giving percentage change every year, and here's 17 years worth of here's how these numbers went up, went down, went up, went down. Yeah. I mean, it's cool for nerds, but I don't think that the average person really reads any of that.
It's the coolest. Comic book news fans read it. I'll tell you that much, Brian.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to keep on the methodology tip, methods. We're going to JJ, John Jackson Miller. John, tell us a little bit about Comicron and what you do, because you rely partially on some of that stuff that Brian provides, and you use that to inform your approach, but you tell us.
Well, what I did in when I was running the magazine in the mid-90s, that's when the first round of distributor wars happened, or at least the first round that we actually refer to as distributor wars. And so in order to actually get unified sales charts again, I worked out an arrangement whereby I got the numbers from Marvel's Heroes World distribution company and was able to merge them with Diamond's. And that just kind of stuck every month since September 96, running up through March 2020. I ran sales charts in Comics Retailer magazine up until the point when I retired to write on a regular basis, novels and comics and whatever. But I continued to do that for Comicron, which I launched as soon as I walked out the door, basically. And I wanted to keep that stuff archived. Comicron, I was able at some point to, really starting in 2003, I was able to actually begin computing not just what was in the top 300 that Diamond put out, but everything. I figured out how to do that. So I had this number that I was running every year. Here's everything that Diamond sold. And that was pretty much everything in the direct market, comic shops, whether they were buying, graphic novels or not. Now, of course, comics retailers are buying graphic novels from places other than Diamond. On the other hand, there's really no place else much that people are getting comic books, physical comic books, other than Diamond. But either way, there were always these buckets of comics on the outside, and certainly you had what was in BookScan developing. And what happened is that Milton Griep approached me, I guess, a little over 7 years ago, and said we ought to try to figure out a way to put it all together. Because again, when he had started those sales charts at Capitol in the 80s, he was really kind of the first person in the distribution part of things that wanted there to be some numbers out there, some transparency, some discussion of what the overall market was, not just in comic shops. And so we just decided at that point to do this tag team thing. We would put it out San Diego week every year. And we stopped doing it San Diego week 2 or 3 years ago, figuring, well, let's get this information out closer to the previous year. But it just didn't matter. Last year it slipped to July. This year it slipped to July. I don't know what happened to distract everybody this year. I'm not sure what it could have been. But yes, we ended up completely coincidentally coming out, I think, 3 days after Brian's report came out, which was just fine by me because it allowed me to look at what I had, and I said, yeah, that's right, or at least we're right anyway. Okay. So yeah, and what we do is we kind of have it divided up. Over the years, my turf has kind of diminished in a sense. I did a lot of tracking on newsstand comic sales. I have all of the subscription comic sales that Marvel and DC do, and everybody through the mail. And we added tracking on the Walmart books that DC did, and just some other things in there. And Milton, basically, he and I together would look at Diamond's graphic novel sales, and then he's got all the BookScan information. Milton also has sources with book fairs, the people that Scholastic, these book fairs in schools. So that's a big portion of our non-BookScan book channel. And then he also has sources in digital. And so digital was there from the beginning. It was very small, and you could see it sort of going up and then plateauing. And then other channels right now, and we'll get to that when you show the panels. We added crowdfunding a couple of years ago, and we have kind of our own method for that as well. So yeah, we get it all together, and then we sit on the phone and have probably the geekiest, dorkiest conversation that anybody in business has, outside of whenever I have to get one of my novels proofread, because we're talking about where the elevator, where the turbo lift goes to on this version of the Enterprise. We wallow in this stuff and say, what bucket does this belong in, and can we really trust this number, and what do we think is really going on here? And then that ends up going into graphics and a report.
So, and then who's the intended audience for what you do?
I've always said that Comicron is a resource for comics research. So, my goal all along in any of what I've been doing is to avoid what was happening. When I was running, the magazine, 25 years ago, I was regularly getting phone calls from Fortune magazine, from the Wall Street Journal, from somebody saying, we hear comics are hot, hot, hot. And there's this new publisher, Techno Comics, out of Florida that is going to set the world on fire. And we're just wanting to know whether that's true. And it's like, yeah, comics were hot, hot, hot 2 years ago. I wanted people to kind of know what was going on. Also, certainly in the internet era, but this is not exclusive to the internet era, comics have been dying in the fan press for 50, 60 years by now. Everybody has their own attitude about the direct market is this, Diamond is that, graphic novels are this. And, it's just, there needs to be a starting point somewhere for the conventional wisdom. And Brian gives one of the starting points, we give another.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll expand on that too. I mean, I agree with that last part, especially that the conversation is constantly has these theories about how comics work that are not proven out by the data at all. When we hear like Comicsgate people will talk about here's how comics work and here's who the audience for comics is. And I can go, no, you're wrong about that.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Clearly see that is not true. The things that you're saying are not factually based and true. They're what you want, and that's cool. Yeah. Like if that's what's in your heart, that you think the comic should be that's one thing. But don't try to say that objectively these are things how are things how
my favorite one with those folks is when it's like, yeah, Rain of Telgemeier, but that doesn't count. That's kids' books or something. I go like, are you what?
Well, and it's not exclusively a left-right thing either. I mean, everybody in this business since the beginning has had their own vision for what they want to see the ideal comics industry to look like, what the end state should be. And there's a lot of people that would really rather variant comics simply not exist, or the back issue market simply not exist. And the thing is that we've always functioned by being a big tent. We have some of this, some of that, some of this. Sometimes this gets out of control, or we do too much of that, or whatever. But it's all still out there. It's all still in the ecosystem, and a lot of it is interrelated. If you take away periodicals tomorrow, that graphic novel number goes because you're not going to have as many books.
Nobody's really thinking about that. I think the real production flow, the closeness of the fans to the storytelling on a month-to-month basis, and how that informs makes it a better story. All right, but we're not here to talk about that stuff, guys. We'll bring you back for panels to talk about that. Let's talk about what we came here to talk about, which is state of the industry. So we know how you get your numbers and what you do with them. So let's talk about what they mean. We decided that we would start with Brian because his stuff is kind of a sub-circle in the Venn diagram that John will follow up on. So let's start with Brian. Talk about what did BookScan tell you about 2019?
Sure. So in the real world, where there are bookstores and Amazon, and that's how people are buying stuff, as opposed to the specialty market, in the real world, comics are up 24% in pieces and 25% in dollars. That's phenomenal growth. That's insanely good.
It's growth. Huge. It's huge. In the publishing world, right? In the print publishing world,
right? And print publishing is, I want to say it's down by like 1.5 or something like that overall.
Yeah, we're the healthiest part of the publishing business.
Yeah, and it's mostly comics aimed at kids. It truly is. Selling phenomenal amounts of those. You're not going to see it in your average direct market comic shop because the average direct market comic shop hasn't really figured out how to do it. It's not that they couldn't do it. It's that direct market comic shops are set up to be clubhouses, and they're set up to be clubhouses that the owner wants to shop at, which primarily means Marvel comic book stores with a little bit of DC. And you're not gonna do a lot of selling Dogman and Raina in those places because it's just not what the owners are into. But we're into it here, and I know that in our individual micro, we're selling a lot of copies of those books.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's and Brian, this is great. I want you to point this out. You are not trying to say direct market stores don't support those books, don't sell those books, can't sell those books, won't sell those books. Just that many do not, for whatever reason, right? But those that do a great job.
I would go so far as to say is that probably 20% of the stores in the direct market, maybe slightly more, are probably selling a lot of copies of these books. A lot of copies of these books. But no one can see it, right? Because they're not buying them from Diamond. any store that's selling any volume of Dogman or Reina would be a moron to buy from Diamond, because Diamond's pricing is so terrible on them, and the shipping, and it's so much easier and cheaper to get them from Scholastic.
Not to mention the retailers.
That was what I was going to say. Yeah, we don't detect it. We don't detect it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the retailer support, right? The book dumps,
the
signings. Yeah. Talk about that for a second.
Talk about what? Signings?
Yeah, just the idea that what you get out of going direct from a Scholastic or through, like, why that's so much better, what they provide that Diamond's never going to provide.
Well,
like, why is it worth my time as a retailer to set up a Scholastic account?
Okay. So the real reason is money. It's a better margin, right?
Of course.
So Diamond is, I want to say, Scholastic is an F publisher, which means they're max 45% off, but you have to subtract the 3% reorder penalty, which means they're 42% off. Then you've got to subtract the shipping, which in my case is about 6%, though right now it's about 10%. So that puts them down to 36 or 32% off. Whereas if I go directly to Scholastic, I get 50% off free shipping, period. The end. For 10 books. 10 books, they'll give me 50% off and free shipping. I don't
and not 10 copies of one book, right?
No, not 10 copies of 10 pieces of the whole shipment. Yeah. And again, I'm not sure how Scholastic actually makes money off of that.
They don't.
But they do. and so
well, they volume. Yeah.
Exactly. And
like the change bank.
We just make change. You have to be of a certain age to remember that.
I mean, they're doing such volume and the great thing is, as a comic book store, to figure out 10 books from Scholastic now that you could sell, you got your Bones, you got your Dogmans, you got your Reinas, you got your so many options.
Sure.
That you'd be a fool not to do that. Okay.
Sure. No, and I'll say very much so. The one benefit I think for the industry as a whole of me doing these book scan charts for the last 17 years is more and more stores are able to look at these things and go, holy shit, they're selling a lot of fucking books over there. Exactly. And you're never going to see that through the Diamond system, right? It's never going to show up in the sales charts. So you don't have any sort of external pressure on you going, oh, there's this whole line of things that I could be selling better, you know? Yeah. So by putting out the data in this way, I hear from retailers all over the place that they're finding out about books that they wouldn't have known about otherwise.
Okay. So 2019 comics in bookstores, explosive, phenomenal, double-digit growth, 25% growth. Any industry's killing for that kind of growth.
Yep.
Okay. Any other takeaways on the 2019 book scan data?
Just that we do have a monopoly problem, I think, or we're getting to have a monopoly problem on the manga side. You know, most manga is controlled by one company, which is Viz. And on the American comics side, Scholastic is very quickly becoming, like, overwhelmingly the majority of the marketplace. I mean, 40% of the marketplace is Scholastic. All that power controlled by one publisher is a thing that maybe people should be slightly concerned about just a little bit. I mean, I like Scholastic. I like what they publish, but I never think it's good for any one manufacturer to get too big. You know, the conversation inside the direct market is, oh, DC and Marvel control everything. But when you look at the real world, DC and Marvel control jack plus shit.
Yeah.
Well, I just did a tweet about that this morning because we don't do, in our report, we don't do market shares. We just don't want to go there because there's way too much horse race stuff going on in the world anyway. But you know, Marvel and DC, even if you account for the book channel, they're still the number one and number two publishers because of the periodical. And that is Marvel is. Yeah, I think Brian, you've got Scholastic at like 88 million or something like that, and then we already know from our own research that the book clubs add 40 million or so. So there's a larger number that they do the book fairs, and then there's their direct market sales as well. Marvel is 215 just through the DM. I mean, 215 million. DC is 155 million just through the DM. And again, in the case of both companies, 70% of that is comics. 70% of that is magazines. So, but again, if you're looking at the graphic novel portion of the market, oh yeah, Scholastic almost certainly beats them, those two.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
And in the graphic novel part of the market, even Viz, I believe, is going to beat Marvel and DC combined, or pretty close to it.
DC at Diamond is 40 million last year, and Marvel's going to be somewhere north of that, but not too much north of that. So it's you throw in what, and DC had 33 in BookScan. So you're looking at 73 at that point. Right. So yeah, I mean, either way, it's none of these numbers are anything that the federal government is going to care about and look at it saying this is a monopoly. It ain't close to that.
Sure.
But nobody should overlook that Scholastic is a Goliath, and of course now Marvel is in bed with Scholastic, so they obviously saw it. So
and if you look at what DC is publishing and what they're promoting right now, it's so clear they're aping the Scholastic format and going after that audience with their YA comic books. I mean, come on, Brian, look at the shape and size of those books.
Yeah, sure. No, sure. The physicality of it. I think when you look at BookScan, and I think BookScan is the better metric here of what's going on with kids in YA. YA is not.
That's fair.
Is not especially a thing. YA is not a huge market for comics, even in BookScan. It's kids comics, middle reader comics, enormous. YA is. It's.
Yeah, I've seen that as the growth area because that's been a big area in traditional print in bookstores. YA has seen a lot of growth in the past whatever years. And that's almost what we're missing now. They've laid the table with the all ages stuff at Scholastic. And it's like, where do you go? The next level used to be go to 7-Eleven and pick up G.I. Joe or whatever off the newsstand. There's nobody there for that market yet.
So let me make an observation there, though, is that I think because of the pictorial nature of comic, in other words, because you're seeing things, I think that a book that what the content that would be in a normal YA prose novel is an adult comic when it's
got it. I see what you're saying.
Because it's sex and it's violence, and those things are very different in prose than they are in when they're illustrated. Okay.
In American comics, I'll agree with you there, but look at the manga situation. They've got that stuff. They seem to have comics all over the place in that area for young adults and everyone in between.
Yeah, but again, if you look at how that material sells in the marketplace, it doesn't particularly sell very well.
I'd agree. There's always been kids comics and adult comics, and you go from one to the other pretty quickly, just based on what's in it. And
yeah. I'll point out like that Catwoman Under the Moon, I think, was the first or second of DC's YA books, and I mean, there's like sections in there where they're talking about cock sizes, like pretty explicitly in the text, right? And if I were the parent of a 13 or 14-year-old, it would not have been acceptable to me, but that's perfectly normal in YA prose. It comes off very, very.
I honestly really think that boils down to because a parent can just pick it up and see a picture and be like, "Oh my gosh," where they would actually have to read and understand the prose. Yeah. Okay.
I also think, and I just to stay on this topic just for one more second, I also think that that once you enter puberty, once you discover girls or cars or whatever that thing is, once you start getting into, upper middle school and high school, you stop reading comics for a couple of years. Just as it's always been that way. It was that way when we were kids, and it's almost certainly going to be that way forever.
That's when I took over everybody else's collections. That's
I was still reading them. I'm like, what do you mean? That's when you stop.
But most people stop.
I get you.
At that point.
Humans,
and
regular
humans.
humans.
And then they come back at college age.
Yeah.
So
That's really what happened. I kind of stopped in college. When I got to college, I got to that phase and I sort of stopped but then came back to it during college for sure.
Literally, I got on the bus for my first day of high school, and all my friends that were into comics in middle school, I was trying to tell them about what was happening in Captain America. Like, well, comics are for kids, John. We don't do that anymore. And I'm like, fine, give me yours. And that's kind of what happened.
Okay. All right. So, Brian, you're good on the book scan side. You feel like that's your takeaways. Comics are up. We had some stuff. All right. Now we're going to go into what did 2019 mean just for comics outside of the bookstores overall? Because I love the distinction here that if you just look at graphic novels, you see certain sizes and giants if you compare them. But then now we're going to take a step back a little bit. Look at the whole picture, because that's what these publishers are looking at. They're looking at just the dollars they're making across all channels. So, John, I'm going to, I want to just isolate you here because I can bring up the graphics. Do you want me to just we'll go through the three graphics?
We'll go through them in order. Let's start with North American comic sales across time, if you got that one. That's the purple
All right, let me ISO you here, and we'll do sales across time right now. Okay, so that's time.
Okay, here we go. And let's see, I need to be on this side over here. Very good. All right, so again, we started this 7 years ago, but we did some retroactive calculations back to 2011. Comic sales went up every year in the 2010s, with the exception of 2017. Now, 2017 was that year where we had kind of our lull in the direct market, where we were down 10%. This actually was not just us. There was a slowdown in but really most of it came from the fact that in the comics market we had just this blockbuster middle of the decade in 2014, 2015, 2016. You got Marvel getting Star Wars back. You've got Secret Wars. 2016, kind of the end of the ride is with Rebirth at DC, and then we have this period in 2017 where people were just not into what Marvel had out that year, but also there are other dynamics going on that I think the variant cover tiers, the thresholds that people need to hit, kind of got out of control. Anyway, but we were right back to growth again in 2018. We found that for 2019, it was a big increase, 11%, $1.21 billion. And we'll get into what channels that came from. But that was, 1.21 billion. This is the first time where print has been above 1 billion. That's print without, the 1.21 billion without digital. This is the first time that we've been over $1 billion for that, all on its own, in nominal dollars ever. Now, if we go back to the early 80s, those years adjusted for inflation, I think the peak year was 1993. Adjust that for inflation, you get 1.4 billion. But we're already starting to creep up on that, and this is really beyond the scope of.
What year did you say that was?
1993. That was Superman Returns from the Dead. That was really the peak of the bubble market of the early 90s. And I believe that was probably the highest number ever, even adjusted for inflation, even if you include the 1940s and 50s. But that's something I'm working on now.
Okay,
it's just they weren't charging. Yeah, they weren't charging enough for the comics back then.
And tell me, what do you think the difference is in the market? I'm muted. You can't hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can't hear him at all.
Oh, lucky you.
Can you hear us?
So hang on a sec. So I'll bring you back in a second. Brian, I'll bring you back in a second. Sorry. So tell me, what are the differences between a market now that's approaching that 1993 market? Do you think it's a healthier market now? Was that humongous?
Well, that almost all of that was comics, and almost all of that was comics. A great deal of it was in the direct market. Not all of it. There were very few graphic novels in it at that point, and possibly most importantly, we cannot guarantee that a lot of those comics actually sold back then. Sell through at retail is much higher now. It tracks a lot more closely to sales figures overall. But back in that era, we talked about the Phantom Reader because there were people that would be buying. If somebody bought 5,000 copies of X-Men Volume 2, number 1, I mean that's not 5,000 readers. And so I think sales today much more closely track the number of actual readers.
Yeah. When it comes to that particular X-Men number 1, when I bought my comic book store, John, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Brian, maybe try if you drop. Brian, you might want to drop and join again. I'm sorry. It might help your audio. I'm not sure. So anyway, back then in that X-Men number 1, when I bought my comic store in 2000, there were still sealed printers cases of every single one of those covers sitting in the back room that I saw.
I only ever bought 1 copy. A few years later, I realized I had 25 copies. I have no idea where they came from. They just sort of multiplied. Every collection I got would have a pile of them. So,
okay, so let's go, John. I'm going to bring you back. So let's go to the next slide if you want. Okay, does that make sense?
Let's go by channel.
Okay.
Okay, and this is by the individual channels. Book channels passed comic stores some time ago. What book channels is? This is everything outside the direct market, including, as I mentioned, book fairs. Book scan is of course all in there, but then we also have Brian talked about the 15%. That 15% that isn't covered by BookScan, the book fairs are in there. There's several other things. The only thing that's not in there because we don't track it at all is sales to libraries. We don't have good sourcing on sales to libraries, so we don't actually count that. One thing that we did this year, we shoveled some money from book channels into comic stores. And that is because we decided for 2019 that we would begin to account for what Brian was talking about, the purchases that comics retailers would make from Random House, from Scholastic, from these other publishers and distributors directly, not through Diamond. So comic stores picked up some money. However, comic stores also lost some money this year, and it actually nets out fairly similar. But what we did was, since we got good sourcing on how much of Diamond's North American sales was actually shipping to North America, what we did is we looked at what they were shipping out. And, Diamond UK, Diamond Europe have never been contained in this. That's never been part of it. But those numbers have always included sales to, say, South America, Australia, the Pacific Rim. And so what we did was we clawed part of that out, and it was a good year to do it because it more or less matches what we believe that the retailers' purchases of graphic novels through sources outside Diamond are. Now, then we also have digital download in the North American comic sales. Yeah, there we go. 90 billion. This is just purchases to own. We do not count things like subscription sites like Marvel Unlimited. We will probably never see numbers on those because that's something where there's no intermediary at all. Marvel has the number and no one else has the number.
Sort of like Netflix. Sort of like Netflix. We'll never really know how many people watch a Netflix series.
That's right. That's right. So, and I kind of have a sense from royalties that the contribution to each individual book is not much. From those things, from the royalties I hear about. But again, that's just not really it. And then other channels, originally this was just newsstand comics and subscription copies. There really is no newsstand anymore except for a handful of things. The Walmart books, the bound issues that end up going to Target are counted in there. Also in this category now, we include crowdfunding. And one of the things that people have asked about is, well, they'll see a number from like Kickstarter about how, what their overall sales are, and why is our number not seeming to reflect that? Well, that's because of what our purpose is. We're only looking at books. We're not interested in tracking what the overall revenue that a publisher could make from a title, or that a creator could make. Marvel sells merchandise. Marvel sells toys. Creators sell sketches. Creators sell original art. And if you go in and you look at crowdfunding campaigns, a tremendous amount of money, a significant amount of what's pledged is going to that, is going to non-comics material, is going to shipping, is going to things that if we want to go apples to apples to apples, we wouldn't count. So other channels, it's still an increase. We bumped it up 5 million from this year to the previous year. It's just, it's never going to, reflect the total sum that somebody's able to make from it. We absolutely agree that crowdfunders are making more money than we're depicting as in terms of making a living. It's just not, the same as if we were to count everything, then Marvel's got a lot of other merchandise, and there's just a whole lot of other stuff we got to throw in. We don't want to do that.
Fair enough. But so tell me, though, what is the methodology for crowdfunded stuff now? How are you sorting that stuff out?
Milton has done interviews with the various the outlets, and then we look at a number of efforts, and we sort of calculate a metric of what we believe is actually the portion that's spent on the books themselves. And if it's a premium version of a book, like a hardcover, well, that would count. That would be fine. It's just, when $100 is added because you get your name in the book, or $100 is added because you get you get a print or something like that. Well, that's outside our definition. And it'll never be perfect, especially since we're counting in 5 millions. That's our increment that we're counting with.
I see.
So it's never going to be perfect. But my old boss at Krause Publications used to say, the only category in any field that ever covers everything is miscellaneous. And at some point, you have to decide what you're going to look at.
Fair enough. Okay, and perfect is the enemy of good, right? Yeah.
Let me also make just a real small point that, particularly with the book channel. I mean, there's an amount there, but we don't really know how much they sold the books for, right? Like, if Amazon's a bigger part of the share, then clearly they're not getting 100% of the dollars.
This is all full retail, but it's also all full retail for comic shops.
Yep.
And so, and actually comic shops are underreported in the sense that markup, we don't count markup. So, if a comic book's coming in and it's getting marked up to $10 over 5, that we don't get that either. So there'll always be something we can't get. Yep. Our last panel will be format, and that's down here.
Did we want to talk? Wait a minute, we're high
across time.
This is really important to me. This tells a story, right? This tells a really important story about the growth of the book channel. So tell us the story, and tell us what's special about 2019.
Well, 2019, book channels pass comic shops, so the comic shops go up as well. But one of the reasons the comic shops went up is because we did give it some of that money that had been going to the book channel. It didn't go up as much as it could because we took some out for the non-North America. Digital has been flat, and people have been wondering about that. Why digital it's flat again? This is purchase to own. This is for people who are not just grazing. This is, I want to have permanently a copy of this thing in my collection. Digital, we see it going up, boom, 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 across time for a long time because what was happening in the early 2000s was similar to what was happening with graphic novels in the early part of this century, or what was happening in the early 2010s, rather, was similar to what was happening to graphic novels in the early 2000s. And what it was that publishers were going back into their libraries going back into their backlists, and they were trying to put out as much stuff as they possibly could, getting it into graphic novel format for the first time. And so we saw in the early 2000s graphic novel sales, particularly from Marvel and DC and the legacy publishers, just growing by leaps and bounds because they were really farming all their stuff. And so there's that stretch there where everybody who wanted to have all the volumes of Sandman are getting them all. And then it sort of levels off more or less. It doesn't level up, but we get past the gold rush, and it becomes more of a maintenance. Now a bigger portion of graphic novel sales in comic shops every month is the new stuff, as opposed to look at all the old stuff we're serving up to you for the first time.
Got it.
Well, exactly the same thing happened with digital. Exactly the same thing. They were throwing stuff up there as fast as they could scan it. And if they've been thinking, they probably would have parceled it out some, because what it meant was that we hit a plateau, and we hit that plateau about 3-4 years ago.
So they blew the wad of the best stuff.
What's that?
They blew the wad of the best stuff.
I mean, if you're a collector, you want a library, and once your library has got what you want in it, all you're getting then from there is the new stuff. Yeah, and so that's why these numbers have not really gone up.
Got it.
Yeah. And one of the things that happens with physical books too is that people will double and triple and quadruple dip as different formats.
Yes. Oh yeah. Right? Oh yeah.
Like you'll get your paperback, then you'll get your hardcover, then you'll get your deluxe hardcover, then you'll get your absolute hardcover, then you'll get your signed tipped in, etc. So sometimes, I must have bought 15 copies of Watchmen over the last 20 years,
Yeah.
But that's probably not happening with digital, right?
No, it's
great point, Brian. Great point.
It's an awesome point, and it's another one of the reasons why print has advantages over digital that people just don't see.
Okay, just one of many, right? Okay, so let's go into format. Let's go into format, John. I know you guys have to wrap up pretty soon. So Brian, the thing here is, I think the tale is being told. The real tale that's being told by the two different numbers here is the explosion of book format, right? And original book format now, especially driven by the young adult scholastic stuff, is making now the bookstore channel outpace and outgrow the direct market comics channel. But there is if the direct market channel goes away, there is no substitute for the revenue of those monthly floppies, right? And
they're not floppies, they're periodicals, for fuck's sake.
They're okay.
Floppies, man, dude. Don't do that. But yeah, no, I truly believe that the bookstore market is missing a beat by not serializing. I honestly think that if Scholastic put out a monthly magazine, which had, 8 pages of Dave Pilkey and 8 pages of Raina, 30 pages of stuff that's coming up from other people who aren't Dave and Raina, I'm sure that book would sell 2 to 3 million copies a month. I just, even in the direct market stores, I think that would be a huge success.
Right.
I think that graphic novels, yes, are an easy to sell format, but I constantly hear from parents that they think, oh my gosh, this is really an expensive hobby that my kids got. I'm glad that they're reading, and I'm enthusiastic. I want to support them reading, but I do very often hear, I wish there was a cheaper way, a cheaper entry point into this. And I think that if you don't serialize, you're just losing an enormous part of the revenue, even if it's just amortizing the cost of production somewhat.
John, you got a thought on that? You wanted to jump in?
Well, can you hear me now?
Oh, so much better. Yeah.
Okay, good. I agree with all of that. We actually had a discussion about the wording in our press release that Milton and I did in our report, because he, in his quote, and I left it alone because it's his quote. He discussed graphic novels being the preferred format. Well, my thinking is, in part, it's Dab Pilkey's preferred format. If he chose to do a comic book, we could sell it. if it's Scholastic's preferred format. If they chose to go into our industry, they could sell it. And so some of this is not the customer's preference because the customer's not getting a choice. And absolutely, you were talking earlier about why retailers don't put more effort into these graphic novels. Well, it's the same reason that they don't put more effort into original graphic novels in comic shops of Marvel and DC and superhero stuff. They only get one bite at the apple at that point.
Yeah.
It's yes, we're glad to see a big special book, like Killing Joke or whatever like that. But give us 2 or 3 chances to sell it. let the consumer, the fan, wants to be able to follow the story as it's going on. All this DC Black Label stuff, I'm certain, yes, it could all go direct to graphic novel, but it will be more popular if you do the individual issues, because not only does the retailer have a chance to sell it, but it gets the 9-figure industry that is the back issue market caring about it and advertising it for free. And whether we like them or not, they don't care about graphic novels. You can't slab a graphic novel.
Yeah. Well, and the heat
you can, but yeah.
If they can flip it, they can make money. There's a
they can, but it's not anywhere near the market that periodicals are. And yeah,
but honestly, couldn't it be if that was the first shot at printing a comic? How is that not a first printing of a comic if it's the first time it's printed, right, in graphic novel format? So,
well, graphic novels tend to be reprinted so often, and it's not always easy to tell for the civilian to tell one printing from another. Pokemon, the Electric Tale of Pikachu, was probably the only million copy seller, the comic book, in between Batman 500 and Star Wars #1. So like a 20-year stretch. But nobody knows what the circular, and only a small handful of them were first printings. But Viz didn't actually say in the comics what printing they were. There's no way to tell.
Got it.
Sure, and
okay.
it becomes sort of addition by subtraction, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
So nobody cares whether you have a first printing or a 5th printing or a 20th printing of Watchmen, but once a book goes out of print, then people fucking care a lot, right?
Yeah.
So like those Marvel Epic editions, right? Like the earlier ones are out of print. And now some of them are selling for like $150, $200 a piece.
Oh well, the
$35 book,
the Marvel Masterworks are ridiculous. I mean, the hardcover. Oh yeah,
those you can almost understand, but those other ones are meant to be a cheap, accessible format to read Marvel comics, right? So it's
I mean, Dog Man, when you get 1 million copies of something out, you get 1 million copies of something out.
That's what I'm saying. Their price per unit has got to be so low at Scholastic that they can charge $7.95 for that nice chunky graphic novel, and they're making plenty of profit on it, I'm sure.
Right. Well, and the report was they printed 4 million copies, right?
Yeah.
I can only prove that they sold 1 million of them. Now, obviously, they sold more than 1 million of them because I don't see like book fairs and things like that.
Well, they're sending them worldwide. They're sending them worldwide, and book fairs and look. There will always be puddles that we're never gonna catch. There's the whole guide simply the whole thing with all of what he's doing, what I'm doing, what everybody's doing is just to give people some metric. Yep. There's something to work with.
Okay, I mean, guys, I think the takeaway from those numbers is 2019 was a great year for comics. It was a better year for graphic novels, but it was still an up year for comics. And if you look at the whole picture, the pie, comics are growing, man. They're blowing up in the mainstream and everywhere. So I want to open it up to some viewer Q&A. Unfortunately, John, when we couldn't hear, and I thought the audience could hear, they could not hear that section. So there might be some questions about that. You went all Mr. Roboto. I'm going to turn on the ability to see comments for you fellers. And then I'll throw a few up on the screen right now. We'll take a look at them. Viewers, if you got more comments now, or if you missed something or want to ask, now's your moment. So I'm going to go through, oh man, coffee breath, member at Comic Book News. Oh, by the way, did you know we have a membership program here? If you click that little join button down there, man, you can sign up to give me money every single month. Just give it right to me. It goes to me. And I'll spend it on comics and help these guys out. What else we got in here? Oh, yeah. Okay, so talking about these books, those books are all a different product. So is manga, all sequential art, but not comics, who are an established form factor in the U.S. You're changing the discussion on the DM. This is the most common thing, is mixing up genre, format, and the medium of comics and everything else. Guys, anything to say about this? This just seems like a misunderstanding.
Oh yeah, I you know, it's what we're doing is we're following the art form and the medium, and we're following how are the various ways that people are able to make money from this. People were looking for years at Miss Marvel's in single issue numbers. She sold over 500,000 graphic novels, just not in our market. But those comics would not have existed without the individual issues. By the time you got to like volume 6 or volume 7, it was no longer necessary for the single issues to make any money at all. They're just there to get you towards the next book. And so to look at any one of our subsectors of this market in complete isolation, you know, you can do it, and you know, certain parts of the market we can do very, very accurately, like the direct market, at least up until 3 months ago. But you know, it's missing the whole thing of where the impact is, and you know,
Sure.
you know, the power of Walking Dead was visible in our market. But boy, was it visible in the book channel.
Yeah.
And,
oh man.
Yeah, and I think it's also important just to understand that the different form factors have different relationships, and people make conclusions about stuff just based on nothing. You know, when I first started this, actually 17 years ago, one of the reasons that I was doing it was partly because people would try to tell me that, oh, you know, all those alternative comics, the reason that they're not succeeding is because they're in the direct market. If they were in the bookstores, they'd be selling so many copies. And the first thing I did that first year was look at Fantagraphics and Drawn a Quarterly, and they didn't sell there either. It was, you know, you can't go, it's this way because this is what we can see, right? It's not always.
Same guy says manga are not comic books, hence they are called manga. I can't argue with that, right? Both can be sequential.
Manga is the word comic books in Japanese.
Okay, we're gonna leave that guy alone.
Well, I mean, and again,
is also comic books, buddy.
The thing is, if you want to just look at manga, you can look at just manga in Brian's report. If you want to look just at the direct market, I did that report in January. Sales were up in 2019 in the direct market last year. I mean, you can look at all those things. We've made it possible for you to cut and slice and dice the business any way you want. If you think that only DC Comics matter, if you think that only, you know, comics with the funny animals matter, you can figure out a way to use the material that we've got out there to describe your world.
And thank you for that. I'm going to do a series here right now from Fat Freddy's Cat. It says YA only in Scholastic. The artists and others make so very little there too. I like the idea of keeping artists poor, but that is evil. And yes, I have a big fluffy cat. There's so many things wrong with all those things that he just said. They're making lots of dough. They don't actually. Does Scholastic even do YA? It's more all ages.
Really, no, they're middle readers for the most part.
All right, so we're moving on from this guy.
And also,
not everyone. I never stopped.
People get paid royalties. It's called royalties. They don't make a lot of money up front doing material like that, but they do get an advance on those royalties. You know, I mean, actually, I think this is one of the things that maybe doesn't get talked about enough. Is there are a lot of people doing graphic novels right now who are getting advances on those graphic novels, but they're never going to earn that. They're never going to earn that advance back ever.
Right.
You know, and so
one of them might be a mega hit.
Paid to do their comic books. they're getting paid minimum wage or less. The good thing about the direct market, the one good thing that you can for sure say is there's page rates, and you're going to get something that's going to be worth your time to draw, at least initially.
Yeah, page rates plus royalties on the back end, right? That makes sense. Okay. Talking about stopping reading comics, I never stopped. I just found a girl that didn't mind. Wasn't that tough. And John Jackson Miller, I like the stuff on your shelves. I manage AMT's sci-fi model kit line. Oh, nice. And people who don't know, John Jackson Miller writes. What do you write, John? Tell us.
Well, this novel is coming out tomorrow. It's called Star Trek Discovery Die Standing, and it's Emperor Georgiou from the Mirror Universe. It's her first mission for Section 31. So this connects to the TV series, and it's an original novel. And I would be at a variety of conventions this summer, but I ain't because everything has gone wrong. But yeah, I mean that's out. My novel from the previous year was Star Trek: The Discovery of the Enterprise War. That is Captain Pike, where the Enterprise was during season 1 of Discovery. That novel's is nominated for a Scribe Award this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. And then in November, I have a Star Wars hardcover coming out. The 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. We're doing another one of these giant charity editions for where it's 40 authors. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, and that comes out in November. And then I just have multiple other irons in the fire, and of course Comicron, the website. If anybody is ever wanting to see these numbers sliced and diced different ways, if you want to see just comics, go to the yearly sales page, and you'll see there's like 25 different subdivisions of the numbers there. And it's my obsession, and I'm being treated for it.
I love it. And then we love you. We thank you for it, man. Where would this world be without you? We would not be able to know a lot of things, man. And we really appreciate it.
Can I ask a question of John?
Of course.
Yeah. So
sure.
here's my question, John. We've only received through March the top 500 list, right? There's nothing for April and past,
right?
Obviously. Do you
think
the charts are going to resume? And when they resume, do you think there's going to be an easy enough way to get Midtown and DCBS's numbers as Lunar and whatever the other fucking one?
Hey guys, okay. I'll be right back. Keep talking about this for a second. I'll be back in a minute.
As Tom Baker, Doctor Number 4 said, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for. I have a plan. I know of one of my colleagues that has a plan, and it is suboptimal compared to if everybody did exactly what Diamond does and puts everything out. Right. It is suboptimal to that. Honestly, having it from more than one source is suboptimal because I've got to do a lot of combinations.
Yeah.
But we will be able to at least ballpark. I can tell you that the reason that I started doing what I did was because there was no information out there. Marvel realized, it was Marvel that approached me and said, we need to actually get these charts going again because it's in their interest to have information out there. It's not clear to what degree it's in DC's interest, or rather AT&T's interest, to have the numbers out there, but we think it's in retailers' interest to have the information out there. We think it's in readers' interest to have the information out there. We think that it's ultimately in DC's interest to have the information out there. And I just, in part, I've been willing to be, we've all been willing to be patient because Lunar and DCBS have had a lot of other things to do. So it's, I can say I do expect.
Womp womp. Well, it's important because the numbers are going to change. I'm particularly super curious about how much the the direct market retailers have cut back.
You know, that's the $64,000 question or $64 million or whatever. As I said in a past report or a past one of these broadcasts with Dan, I believe that 2020's numbers are going to be garbage. They're not going to be something we're going to want to compare to ever. Maybe as a comparison for what happens in an emergency, but it's going to be a very long time before you're going to see anything but noise.
I will say that anecdotally, a number of publishers told me that, not DC, but a number of like Image. I don't want to say who, but they said that their numbers actually went up in like that first time start ordering again.
And I've heard that too, but there's just so many factors involved here. No matter what, we've got books for the last quarter that are mostly returnable. So that's all out the window. And you know, then we've got the matter of you know, we got retailers that are, it's going to be hard to project things from retailer to retailer to retailer. We're already, you know, 2,000 different marketplaces. But I mean, you know, just knowing the retailers I know locally, we've got shops that have said we're not going to do any reorders with DC. We've got other shops that are, you know, treating different strategies. And so
the crazy part is right now we can't do reorders. We literally can't. There are no products to reorder right now. This week's comics have all sold out from the new distributors.
Yeah. And so,
Brian, that's the plan, dude. I mean, they don't want no waste. They want to get them into your shops and be done with them. That's pretty obvious.
But I'm getting, I'm getting from retailers though that if let's say the books were there, they wouldn't place the reorders because a DC reorder is not going to be enough books to cover the shipping. And of course, the shipping is less. I mean, that's the one thing people are noticing is, look, here's, you know, the shipping is so much better. But in part, that's because Diamond was not able to you know, raise the rates it was getting from Marvel and DC for years and years in their contract. So I wouldn't be surprised that they were, you know, that you know, they're having to make money elsewhere. I don't know. But at any rate, no, there's just, this is. I joked in the last broadcast that, you know, I did the magazine because I dropped out of grad school because I could no longer study the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had collapsed and nothing made any sense anymore. Well, this is basically all of that nonsense that I was covering in the mid 90s. You know, I have sitting here. This is the very last catalog from Friendly Frank's. This is the very last catalog from Styx. This is the very last Advanced Comics. You know, this is the very last Heroes. No, actually, that's Andromeda. This is the very last Heroes World catalog where there's only one sideways mention that they might be Marvel next month. And I had these things here because I was going to do a retrospective at some point, but the world has never slowed down long enough.
You know, well, I wanted to mention that John is like the only guy in the world that like people go like, man, I got these big old boxes of old catalogs that are completely useless to anyone in the universe. And John's like, oh yeah, I'll pay the shipping on that.
I don't need any more. I don't need any more. I've got them all. But
okay, guys, I gotta wrap this up. I'm sorry. I gotta get back to the real world. But any final comments and remarks on 2019 year in review for comics and maybe where we're going? Like, how about my normal thing is predictions. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Brian Hibbs first. Make a prediction, Brian.
Oh, my prediction is if COVID hadn't happened, that comics would have continued to grow. I don't know that we would have necessarily seen a 25% growth like we did in 2019 and 2020. But I don't know that I would have predicted 25% growth in 2019 either. But there's clearly this enormous market for kids comics. Kids want to read comics. They really, really want to read comics. And so the big question that we've got to figure out is how do we do that same thing with adults?
Great question. I've always said kids that love comics are kids that love reading, right? That's the thing. So you get your kid to read a comic, you got a reader for life, and we don't have enough of those.
Yep.
Brian, thank you. Stick around if you want. Actually, I'm not going to have much time, but stick around if you want. We might have a few minutes.
I got to go check.
Oh, sorry. Yoink. All right, JJ, bring us home with a prediction, man. 2020.
Well, I'll say this with regard to COVID. We were in a good place. 2019 was strong. The first quarter of 2020, and there's another broadcast you and I did about that in your queue there. Was starting well. It's better to have something like this happen. It's never good to have something like this happen, but it was better that it happened this year than in 2018, when we had just been down 10%, because retailers had some cash. I tell you one prediction I would have, the next time, if there is a next time, whether it's a pandemic or a meteor strike or a comet or whatever, we'll at least have a model. We'll at least have some idea of how to shut down the industry and how to start it again.
Okay. John, you froze there. We heard what you had to say. Your image froze for a second. But, man, thank you for not just those predictions, but for all the work that you've been doing for decades, counting the stuff nobody else is counting.
It's internet in the wild Wisconsin. So,
okay. Thanks, John. We'll talk to you soon. I'm going to pull you out of there for a second. All right, guys, that's it. We're going to wrap this thing up. I got to get back to the real world. I got stuff to do. So I can't just be a talking head anymore. This is where I go back into reality and become, do my day job thing that I do. So thank you for joining us here on Comic Book News, talking about 2019. Thank you for your great comments and your great questions too. I really appreciate that, man. See, you don't got to super chat. You don't got to pay to get a comment in here. Come on in and ask a good question. We're going to answer it. I really want to thank everybody who's joined, who's become a member of Comic Book News. There's not a lot of them, but those that are really helping out. All the money from memberships goes towards building this channel and my personal comic book collection and my mission of reading every single comic book ever created. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but with your help, I'm willing to give it a shot. So anyway, we're going to roll the closing credits. And if you are a member, you might see yourself in there, or if you're a special friend, Odan, and you might stick around for a post-credit cameo at the end, because, we've got a lot of, these guys have been using the same tools for many years to try and piece together actionable intel on this industry. And I just want to thank both of them. They're great. They're friends of mine. They're friends of this channel. This channel would not be the same without them. And it wouldn't be the same without you either. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Chucklehead, did you get the tools?
What tools?
The tools we've been using for the last 10 years.
Oh, those tools. Yeah, I got them.
Yeah, those tools.